If you have been watching the Nancy Guthrie case unfold, you already know the main threads. You know Nancy was last seen on the evening of January 31st, dropped off at her home in the Catalina foothills by her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni at around 9:48 at night. You know she was reported missing the following morning when she did not show up for a virtual church service. You know the FBI has been involved from early on. You know the Joint Task Force is active. You know there are suspects, theories, and evidence threads that the public has only seen pieces. What I want to talk about today starts with something small. It starts with a gardener standing in a yard somewhere near where Nancy used to walk her dog, a man who works in the neighborhood, a man who has been there for months, maybe years, a man who came forward recently and said something that I think deserves more attention than it has received. He said that in all the weeks since Nancy Guthrie disappeared, no investigator had ever come to speak with him. He found that surprising. I find it more than surprising, and I think by the end of this video you will understand why that one detail, a gardener who was never asked what he saw, may tell us more about the state of this investigation than anything that has been reported in the last 6 weeks. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I want to start by talking about the Catalina foothills as a place, not as a crime scene, as a neighborhood. Because I think understanding how this neighborhood actually functions is essential to understanding what may have happened to Nancy Guthrie. The Catalina foothills is a wealthy residential area on the outskirts of Tucson. The homes are large, the lots are spread out, the streets are quiet. The residents, for the most part, are not the people you see when you drive through. They are behind walls, behind gates. They work from home, they travel. They live their lives largely indoors or in enclosed backyards that are not visible from the street. The people you actually see in a neighborhood like this, and the people who are outside moving through the streets, walking through side gates, operating in driveways and front yards are not the residents. They are the workers. Landscapers who arrive at 7 in the morning and spend hours trimming hedges, mowing lawns, blowing leaves, pool technicians who check chemicals and clean filters, pest control workers spraying perimeters, window washers on ladders, HVAC contractors replacing units on rooftops, delivery drivers, general laborers, and construction workers, crews building additions, remodeling kitchens, replacing roofs, pouring foundations on vacant lots. These people are present in the Catalina foothills every single day. They come and go with a regularity that the residents themselves have long stopped noticing. A work truck parked on the corner is background noise. A crew operating on a lot 3 houses down is just another renovation. Nobody asks questions. Nobody checks IDs. The workers are part of the scenery. And here is the thing about being part of the scenery. It cuts both ways. Because workers see things. Not because they are trying to. Not because they have any intention. Simply because they are there. A landscaper trimming a hedge along a property line can see into the neighbor's driveway. He can see which car is there in the morning and which one is gone. He can tell you without ever being asked that the woman 3 houses down used to walk a little black dog every morning, and then sometime around December, she stopped. A pool technician who visits a property weekly notices when the security cameras are pointing at the pool and when they are pointing at the gate. He notices because he has to walk past them every time he comes in. Over weeks, he builds a mental map of where the cameras are, not on purpose, just from repetition. A construction worker on a scaffold has elevation. He can see over the walls that block street level views. He can see front gates and driveways and porch lights from a vantage point that the homeowner's own security system was never designed to cover. In the criminology literature, this kind of knowledge has a name. It is called ambient surveillance. It is the passive, unintentional, comprehensive understanding of an environment that builds up over time simply through repeated presence. Workers in residential neighborhoods accumulate this knowledge without trying. They do not need to hack a camera system. They do not need a family member feeding them information. They do not need to break into anyone's house or steal anyone's mail. They just show up every day and they keep their eyes open. And the knowledge they accumulate, which houses have cameras, which gates are locked, which routines are consistent, which homes are occupied and which are empty, which dog barks, and which one stopped at barking, is precisely the kind of knowledge that whoever took Nancy Guthrie appears to have had. Now, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before I continue. If you live in a house right now, do you know the name of the person who mows the lawn 3 doors down from you? Do you know what company they work for? Could you describe their face to a sketch artist? Because they could probably describe yours. They could probably tell an investigator what time you leave for work, what car you drive, and whether your porch light comes on at night. They know your routine better than your friends do, and you have never spoken to them. That is ambient surveillance, and it is happening on every residential street in America right now. That connection is what I want to explore in this video, not because I believe a worker is responsible. I want to be clear about that, but because the category of people who had this kind of ambient knowledge of Nancy's environment is much wider than the inner circle that the investigation has publicly focused on. And at least one person in that wider category is, a gardener, says he was never asked what he saw. Let me tell you what the gardener actually said, because the specifics matter. On March 13th, he spoke to a journalist from JLR Investigates. The Mirror picked up the story. The Irish Star reported on it independently. He is a man who works as a gardener in the neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie lived. He did not give his full name in the interview. He described himself simply as someone who works in the area regularly. He knows the streets, he knows the properties, he has been there long enough to recognize faces, and he said that since Nancy disappeared, which at that point was more than 6 weeks, no one from law enforcement had ever come to speak with him. Not the FBI, not the Pima County Sheriff's Department, not a single investigator from any agency. He said he found that surprising. Now, I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think the instinct when you hear something like this is to immediately jump to what it means. Does it mean the investigation is flawed? Does it mean they have missed something? Does it mean the gardener saw something important? Maybe. But before we go there, ask yourself this. If you were running this investigation, would you have spoken to every worker on that street by now? Or would you have focused your resources on the people closest to Nancy and worked outward from there? Because that's not a simple question. There are legitimate reasons to go narrow first. And there are legitimate reasons to say that 6 weeks without interviewing the gardener is a problem. I think reasonable people can disagree on this, and I want to know where you land. Maybe, but I do not want to rush past the detail itself. A man who works regularly in the neighborhood where an 84-year-old woman was kidnapped. A case that has involved the FBI, a joint task force, hundreds of agents, and national media. Coverage was never contacted. That is a data point. And data points matter. He was also asked when he last saw Nancy, and his answer was telling. He said it had been somewhere between 8 months and a year. He described a brief exchange, catching her one morning saying hello. That was the last time. Think about what that means for a moment. A man who works on the same street where Nancy lives, who is outside in that neighborhood regularly, had not physically seen her in close to a year. That tells us something about Nancy's visibility, or lack of it, in the months before she was taken. She was not a regular presence in the front areas of her property for a significant stretch of time. Whether that was because of health, travel, changing habits, or something else entirely, I do not know. But the fact that she had withdrawn from the visible parts of her own life for that long raises a question that I think investigators should be considering carefully. At what point did she become visible again? At what point in December or January did her routine become observable to someone who was paying attention? And who was paying attention during that window? I want you to think about that, because if Nancy was invisible for 8 months and then suddenly became visible again in December or January, what changed? Did the dog's death in December change her habits? Did she start going outside more? Did someone start visiting more frequently? The window between invisibility and visibility is the window the kidnapper used, and identifying what opened that window may be as important as identifying the kidnapper himself. Because whoever took Nancy did not act on 8-month-old information. They acted on current intelligence. Somebody was watching her in the weeks before February 1st, and the gardener statement tells us that the person doing that watching was not necessarily someone who knew her. It could have been someone who simply happened to be in right place at the right time, someone whose daily work put them within sight of her property during the exact window when her routine became visible again. Now, let me talk about the construction angle, because this is where the investigation appears to have shifted this week, and I want to walk through why that shift matters. Brian Enton reported on March 17th that the FBI has returned to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood and has been asking residents a new set of questions. Specifically, they are asking about several houses that are under construction in the area, and they are asking for names. His exact phrasing, they are asking specifically for names of contractors and workers who were working in the neighborhood, on those houses, on those construction projects, and I am talking about specifics. They want the names of all the contractors and workers who were working on those houses. That level of specificity is notable. The FBI does not request the name of every individual worker on every construction crew in a neighborhood unless they believe those identities could be relevant to the investigation, whether that means they have a specific lead pointing towards someone in the construction workforce or whether they are conducting the kind of broad canvass that should have happened earlier. I genuinely cannot tell you which one it is, but I want you to consider what it means that this is happening now. Not in the first week, not in the second week, now after 6 weeks. Is this the FBI widening a net that should have been wider from the start? Or is this the FBI narrowing in on something specific that led them back to the construction sites? Because those two possibilities lead to very different conclusions. And the answer changes everything about where this case is headed. What I can tell you is why construction activity in the Catalina Foothills creates a particular kind of investigative challenge and opportunity. The Catalina Foothills is a neighborhood where property values are high and renovation is constant. In January, the weeks directly preceding Nancy's disappearance, there would have been active construction projects within visual range of her home. Workers on those projects would have been present day after day, sometimes for weeks. They would have had a legitimate reason to be stationary in the area for extended periods. And that stationarity is what matters. Because a construction worker is not passing through, he is not delivering a package and leaving. He is there all day, for weeks, positioned on a scaffold or a rooftop or next to a parked truck, with a clear, sustained, uninterrupted view of the surrounding streets. I want you to consider the geometry for a moment. A worker on a scaffold 2 houses down from Nancy's property would have had a direct, elevated line of sight to her front gate, her driveway, and her front door. From that elevation, he could see over the walls that provide privacy at street level. He could observe when her car was in the driveway and when it was not. He could see when someone arrived in the evening and when they left. He could track the pattern of porch lights, when they came on, when they went off, whether they came on at a consistent time each night. A worker in a parked truck at street level would have had a different vantage point. He could observe foot traffic. He could note when the landscaping crew arrived and when they left. He could identify which cameras were visible from the street and estimate the angles they covered. Over time, and this is the key word, over time, he could identify the blind spots, the approaches to Nancy's property that no camera was positioned to capture. And none of this observation would have appeared in any footage from Nancy's own cameras, because Nancy's cameras were pointed at her property. They were not pointed at the street. They were not pointed at the lot 2 houses down. They were not designed to capture a man on a scaffold looking in her direction. That is the surveillance gap that exists in this case. Nancy's cameras captured everything that happened within their field of view. They captured nothing that happened outside it. And outside it is exactly where a construction worker would have been positioned. Here's what I want you to ask yourself. If you were the person planning this, if you wanted to learn everything about Nancy's property without being recorded, where would you stand? You would stand exactly where the cameras could not see you, and in the Catalina Foothills, that means the street, the neighboring lots, and the construction sites, the places where presence is normal and cameras do not reach. Now, January in Tucson is important context here. This is not a northern city where winter shuts down outdoor work. The temperature in Tucson in January ranges from the mid-40s at night to the mid-60s during the day. There is no frozen ground. Construction proceeds on schedule. Landscaping crews are active. Pool maintenance continues year-round. The volume of outdoor workers in the Catalina Foothills in the weeks before Nancy disappeared was not reduced by winter. It was at its normal level, which means the number of people who had sustained access to the environment around her home and the ambient knowledge that comes with that access was significant. And as of mid-March, at least one of those people had never been asked what he saw. Now, I want to connect the construction angle to something else that became public this week, because I think these two details may be related. And if they are, the picture that emerges is significant. Investigative reporter Dave Mack reported that renters who lived in a home near Nancy's property moved out immediately after her disappearance. His exact phrasing, "They were there until the kidnapping and then gone." Neighbor Laura Gargano confirmed this separately to Brian Enton. She said, "There are not many rentals in the area, but there is one nearby, and whoever lived there had moved out within a few days of this happening. She noticed because their vehicle was no longer there. She reported it to investigators herself." Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Kriegier, who spent nearly 3 decades in law enforcement, is signed, explained to Parade why this kind of detail attracts investigative attention. He said suspects can use properties like vacant homes as a home base or staging location. He said it provides a cover story to be at those locations at different times. He said it allows someone to stay under the radar to see the activity of the neighborhood, the comings and goings of people, the timing of things, all the people, including Nancy. He also said something I want you to hold on to. He said a vacant home could be a location to set up surveillance equipment. It could be easily stashed in a structure or on the property without anyone knowing. Now, those could be two separate, unrelated facts. Construction workers in the neighborhood, a rental home that emptied overnight. It is entirely possible that they have nothing to do with each other. But I want to ask you, does that feel like a coincidence to you? Construction activity providing daytime cover, a rental home providing nighttime cover, both present in the weeks before the kidnapping, both gone after it. If those are unrelated, that is an extraordinary alignment of circumstances. And if they are related, the implications are significant. Consider the alternative. What if someone took a short-term rental near Nancy's property as a base of operations? And what if they used the construction activity in the neighborhood as additional cover during the day? A reason to be outside, to be visible on the street, to move through the area without anyone registering their presence as unusual. During the day, you observe from the construction site. At night, you plan from the rental. Over weeks, you build a complete picture of the target's life, her schedule, her cameras, her vulnerabilities, the dog that used to bark and no longer does, the hearing aids that come out at the same time every night, the gate that is left unlocked when the son-in-law leaves after dinner, and the night the operation is executed, you leave both positions. The work site closes out, the rental empties, the car disappears. In military and intelligence contexts, this is called embedded reconnaissance. An operative moves into a target's environment and becomes part of it. They are not watching from a distance. They are living in the scenery, a neighbor, a worker, a daily presence that nobody questions. Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, studied neighborhoods for weeks before he acted. He mapped layouts and identified vulnerabilities. Brian Koberger, in the Idaho murders, was tracked by investigators passing through the victim's neighborhood multiple times before the attack. The pattern is documented. Sustained observation from a position of normalcy. And in a neighborhood like the Catalina foothills, a construction site and a rental home provide two of the most normal, invisible positions imaginable. I'm not saying this is what happened. I want to be clear about that. I am laying out a possibility that I think deserves serious investigative attention. And based on the FBI's actions this week, asking for construction worker names, inquiring about the rental property, it appears that investigators may be thinking along similar lines. Let me explain a technical point about the camera footage that I think is relevant here, because the FBI's review of thumbnail images from Nancy's property has been cited as evidence that nothing suspicious happened. And while that is technically accurate, it is not the complete picture. Nancy's property had motion-activated cameras covering the pool, the backyard, and the side yard. These cameras generate low-resolution thumbnail images when they detect motion. The FBI recovered weeks of these thumbnails. They showed landscapers, pool workers, family members, normal activity, nothing out of the ordinary. But thumbnails have real limitations. They are low-resolution stills triggered by motion in a specific zone. They do not provide clear facial identification in most cases. They do not capture audio, and they do not capture anything that occurs outside the camera's field of view. So a construction worker on a scaffold 2 streets away is invisible to the thumbnails. A man sitting in a parked truck on the corner, invisible. A renter looking through a window at Nancy's front gate, invisible. The cameras protected Nancy from people who physically approached her property. They did not protect her from someone who studied her property from a distance and never needed to step inside the frame. And on the night Nancy was taken, those same cameras, the ones that had been reliably generating thumbnails for weeks, captured absolutely nothing. No motion, no images, nothing. Sources familiar with the investigation describe that absence as odd. I think odd is an understatement. The cameras worked before. They worked after. Neighbors reported internet disruptions and camera malfunctions around the same window. The sheriff's department confirmed they are investigating a damaged utility box near Nancy's home. If the person who planned this spent weeks studying those cameras from outside their field of view, learning their positions, their coverage zones, their blind spots, then the fact that those cameras went dark on the night of the abduction is not odd. It is the result of careful, sustained, and informed preparation. And the position from which that preparation was most easily conducted was day after day, without suspicion, with a clear view of the entire property, was a construction site. And here's where something flips. The cameras on Nancy's property, the ones that were supposed to protect her, may have actually helped the person who took her, because those cameras were visible. Their positions were obvious to anyone standing outside the property, and a person who could see the cameras could also see what they covered and what they did not cover. The security system that was meant to keep Nancy safe became the map that showed someone exactly how to get around it. The cameras did not fail Nancy because they were broken. They failed her because they were visible. And visibility in a system designed for protection is also a vulnerability. That is a sentence I want you to sit with, because it applies to more than just cameras. It applies to the entire security framework of Nancy's life. The gate that was visible from the street, the hearing aids that came out at a predictable time, the dog that used to bark and then stopped. Every layer of protection Nancy had was observable from the outside, and observable means defeatable by someone with enough time and patience to watch. There is a distinction I want to draw here because I think it is fundamental to understanding what may have happened. There is a difference between someone who knows a person and someone who knows their patterns. Knowing Nancy personally means knowing her medical history, her family relationships, her emotional life. That kind of knowledge requires years of proximity and trust. Knowing Nancy's patterns means knowing when her lights go on and off, when her car leaves, when she's alone, where the cameras point, where the blind spots are, when the dog stopped barking. That kind of knowledge does not require a relationship. It requires presence. Sustained, regular, unnoticed presence in the same environment over weeks. The investigation, as far as we can observe from the public record, has focused heavily on people who knew Nancy personally. Family, close associates, individuals with a direct personal connection, but the proximity theory, the idea that someone gathered operational knowledge through ambient surveillance rather than personal access, has not been publicly explored with the same rigor, and the Gardner's statement suggests it may not have been fully pursued. Both theories explain the evidence. Both account for the planning, the timing, the apparent knowledge of cameras and routines and vulnerabilities. The question is which one the investigation has weighted more heavily, and whether the balance has been right. I genuinely do not know the answer to that, but I want you to think about which theory you believe. Because if the inner circle theory is right, the investigation is on track and the arrest is a matter of time. But if the proximity theory is right, if the person who took Nancy was someone who gathered their knowledge from outside her life, then the investigation may be looking in the wrong direction, and the longer it takes to widen the lens, the colder the trail gets. From an investigative standpoint, thorough canvass of the worker population in a case like this involves specific steps. I want to outline them because I think it helps to understand what the standard should be. Step 1. Pull all active building permits within a defined radius of the victim's property. Every permitted project means a contractor on record. Every contractor means workers. That is a traceable list. Step 2. Pull all business licenses for landscaping, pool service, pest control, and related services operating in the relevant zip codes. Cross-reference against residents on the target streets. Interview the owners. Get crew lists. Talk to the workers directly. Step 3. Canvas Day labor staging areas. In Tucson, these exist. Workers gather in the early morning to be picked up for jobs. Investigators who partner with community organizations and Spanish-language media can reach people that standard federal methods cannot. Step 4. Issue a targeted public appeal, not a generic tip line. Request. A specific ask. If you worked in the Catalina foothills in January or early February, please contact us. Make it safe to come forward. Make it clear that calling does not make you a suspect. Based on what the gardener said, steps 2 and 3 appear to be incomplete. Step 4 has not happened publicly. There is also a practical complication. The Tucson area has a significant informal labor market. Day laborers, workers who move between jobs without formal employment records, people who, for a range of understandable reasons, are not going to voluntarily approach federal investigators. Formal methods, pulling permits, checking licenses, surface only the documented workforce. Workers paid in cash, workers without fixed employers, workers who move between crews, they fall outside the reach of a standard canvas. And if one of those workers saw something relevant, that information may sit uncollected in someone's memory unless there is dedicated outreach designed to reach them. I am not saying the FBI has neglected this. I do not have access to the full scope of the task force's work. Federal investigations involve steps that are never disclosed to the public. But when a potential witness goes to a journalist because investigators never came to him, that is a signal worth paying attention to. Let me present 3 scenarios for where the investigation may stand on this angle, and then I will tell you which one I think is most likely. Scenario 1. Investigators have already explored this thoroughly. They canvassed every worker they could identify, gathered what they needed, and determined that this angle did not produce relevant leads. The gardener who spoke publicly fell through a communication gap, a single missed contact in an otherwise complete effort. Scenario 2, the investigation has been deliberately narrow. Investigators have a specific person or persons in their sights and have deprioritized the broader canvas because they believe they already know who is responsible. The worker angle is a genuine lead that was consciously set aside in favor of what investigators consider a stronger thread. Scenario 3, the canvas has genuine gaps. The size of the neighborhood, the informal labor market, the logistical challenge of identifying every worker present across a multi-week period, all of it created blind spots. The gardener is not an anomaly. He represents an unaddressed category of potential witnesses. Important information may still be out there. Based on everything I have read and analyzed, I think the truth is probably a combination of scenarios 1 and 2, with the possibility of scenario 3 being more significant than investigators would prefer. In high-pressure, multi-agency investigations involving a politically sensitive victim, and with Savannah Guthrie's public profile, that sensitivity is real. There is always a risk that the urgency to pursue a strong lead causes the wider canvas to be set aside before it is actually finished. The gardener is a reminder that the wider canvas may not be finished. I want to hear which scenario you think is most likely, because I have laid out 3 possibilities and I have told you what I think. But this is your case too. You have been watching it, you have been thinking about it, and your read on where the investigation stands matters. Tell me in the comments, scenario 1, 2, or 3, and tell me why. I need to pause here and say something that steps outside the analytical frame I have been working in, because there is a human dimension to this that I do not want to lose in the details. Savannah Guthrie stopped by the Today Show studio this week for the first time since her mother was taken. She hugged her colleagues. She cried. She told them she plans to come back but does not know when. An 84-year-old woman's medication is sitting on a kitchen counter. Her hearing aids are still in the house. Her family has spent every day since February 1st in a state of suspended grief. Unable to mourn because they do not know, unable to hope because the evidence does not support it, and unable to stop either one. That is what this case has done to the people at the center of it. And it is worth remembering that behind every investigative gap and every unasked question, there is a family that is breaking. Now let me bring together everything I have laid out, because the construction workers, the rental home, the gardener, and the camera blind spots are not separate stories. They are one story. And when you see them together, a framework emerges that I think investigators need to reckon with. Every piece of insider knowledge that has been attributed to someone in Nancy's personal circle, the cameras, the gate, the dog, the medication, the hearing aids, the schedule, could also have been gathered by someone who was never inside her life, someone who is inside her neighborhood. A construction worker on a scaffold learns the camera positions. A renter across the street learns the schedule. A landscaper notices the dog is gone. A pool technician sees the gate left unlocked. And none of them need to exchange a single word with each other for the picture to be complete, because each one gathers their piece independently, simply through presence. But what if they were not independent? What if the construction presence and the rental presence were connected? What if someone used the construction activity as daytime cover and the rental home as a nighttime base? What if the person who rented that home, the one who was there until the kidnapping and then gone, was not a random tenant who coincidentally left at the worst possible time? What if the lease itself was the operation? That is the question that separates this case from every other angle that has been covered. And it is a question that I do not believe has been asked clearly enough. Because if someone moved into a home near Nancy Guthrie's property specifically to study her, to learn her cameras, her routines, her vulnerabilities, then this was not a crime that required an insider. This was a crime that manufactured its own insider, someone who embedded themselves in her environment and became invisible through familiarity, someone who lived the cover story instead of just wearing it. The investigation has been looking for someone who already had access to Nancy's life. But the person next door does not need prior access. They create their own. And by the time the operation is executed, they know everything an insider would know. Because proximity over weeks produces the same result as intimacy. That is the shift I think this case needs. Not away from the inner circle theory, but alongside it, because both paths lead to the same operational knowledge, and only one of them has been fully explored. Now, if the person who took Nancy is watching this, and in a case this, public they almost certainly are, I want to address something directly. The cameras you disabled are back online. The thumbnails you thought were erased were recovered from local storage. Google engineers worked with the FBI to pull footage you believed was destroyed. The DNA you left from your mouth, from your gloves, from the surfaces you touched in those 41 minutes is being processed in a lab that does not care how careful you thought you were. And the neighborhood you moved out of, the one you thought you left behind cleanly, people noticed. Laura Gargano noticed the car was gone. A retired SWAT commander looked at that empty home and used the word staging location on national media. And the FBI is asking questions about it right now. You planned for the cameras. You planned for the Wi-Fi. You planned for the hearing aids and the dog and the medication. But you did not plan for the gardener who noticed things from 3 houses down. You did not plan for the neighbor who called investigators on her own because something felt wrong. And you did not plan for the fact that in a neighborhood full of workers, people who are present every single day, who see everything, who remember more than they realize, Gutong, someone saw something, maybe a face, maybe a vehicle, maybe a pattern that did not make sense at the time but makes perfect sense now. That person has not come forward yet, but they will. Because $1.2 million has a way of shaking memories loose, and the number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The investigation is active, the task force is working, and something shifted this week. The FBI went back to the neighborhood and asked new questions about construction workers, about a neighbor who moved out, about names. Here is what I am watching for: whether the gardener is contacted by law enforcement after his public statement, whether the FBI issues a targeted public appeal directed at workers in the Catalina foothills, whether any new development involves a rental property or a short-term tenancy, And whether investigators expand their canvas to include community outreach and informal labor networks in the Tucson area, because the person who took Nancy Guthrie knew her environment. They knew her cameras, they knew her schedule, they knew her vulnerabilities, and the answer to how they knew may not be sitting at a dinner table 4 miles away. It may be sitting in the lease records of a rental home that emptied the night Nancy disappeared, or in the permit files of a construction project that gave someone a scaffold and a clear line of sight to everything they needed, or in the memory of a worker who was there every day and saw the ordinary thing that should not have been there. If you work in the Catalina foothills area or know someone who does, especially anyone who was there in January or early February, please encourage them to reach out. Not because they are a suspect, because they might hold the piece that connects everything. 1-800-CALL-FBI, tips.fbi.gov, 52035-149-0088, crime. The combined reward is $1.2 million. Cash, anonymous, subscribe, share this with anyone following the Nancy Guthrie case, and tell me in the comments, do you think someone embedded themselves in that neighborhood? Do you think the rental home was a coincidence? Because I am not sure it was. And I do not think the FBI is sure either. We are not done with this, not by a long way.